$29 billion. That's what this war has already cost. Not what it will cost, what it has already burned through. And the Pentagon admitted that number jumped by $4 billion in just 2 weeks. Now, one expert at Harvard says the final bill could hit $1 trillion. And when a reporter asked the President of the United States whether he thinks about what this is doing to American families financially, he said no. That answer is at the center of everything happening right now. And by the end of this video, you'll understand exactly what it means and what comes next. This is May 13th, 2026. The United States is at war with Iran. Not a proxy conflict, not sanctions, a real war, launched on February 28th of this year, with U.S. and Israeli forces striking Iranian territory and Iran retaliating by slamming shut one of the most critical shipping corridors on the planet, the Strait of Hormuz, a narrow choke point between Iran and Oman. Roughly 20% of the world's oil flows through it in normal times. Right now, it is slowed to almost nothing. Ships that attempt the crossing risk being attacked or seized. The U.S. has imposed a naval blockade on Iranian ports, and the economic consequences are being felt in every country on earth. At the center of all this is a war that is costing $29 billion and counting, a fragile ceasefire that the U.S. president himself has described as being on massive life support, and a diplomatic gamble. Trump flying to Beijing to sit down with Xi Jinping and ask China to help break Tehran's will. If you want fast, fact-based coverage of a story moving this quickly, subscribe right now. We are tracking every major development as it happens. Let's go back to the beginning. February 28th, 2026. U.S. and Israeli forces launch strikes against Iran. The stated justifications, according to U.S. officials, ending Iran's nuclear program, reducing its ballistic missile capabilities, and cutting off Iran's financial and military support for regional armed groups, including Hezbollah in Lebanon. Iran's response was immediate and severe. Tehran ordered the closure of the Strait of Hormuz to almost all international shipping, a move that sent oil markets into chaos overnight and within days had pushed crude futures well above $100 a barrel. The U.S. responded with a naval blockade of Iranian ports, two military forces each trying to strangle the other economically while actively fighting. A ceasefire was eventually negotiated. It has largely held, but barely. Even now, a shadow drone war continues. Kuwait, the United Arab Emirates, and Iran all reported intercepting drones over the weekend, the kind of quiet, low-grade violence that makes anyone who calls this a ceasefire speak carefully. Now, here's where the money comes in. As of May 13, 2026, the Pentagon has confirmed the war has cost the United States $29 billion. $4 billion more than the figure senior Pentagon officials provided to Congress just 2 weeks ago. That number has been climbing in $4 billion increments, and the rate of increase is not slowing. One war budgeting expert told CNN the conflict will ultimately cost U.S. taxpayers at least $1 trillion. That's the projection from Harvard Kennedy School. $1 trillion. For context, that's more than the entire U.S. defense budget in a single year. And what about the nuclear talks? That's the stated reason the war started. The deadlock between the U.S. and Iran stems from fundamentally different priorities. Trump wants what analysts describe as a quick and decisive result, immediate concessions on Iran's nuclear program. Tehran wants to delay those demands and extract its own concessions first, proposing a phased approach where the initial stages focus on ending the war, lifting sanctions, and ending the U.S. naval blockade, with nuclear discussions deferred to later rounds. Trump has rejected that sequencing entirely. He has demanded that Iran formally halt its nuclear program for a defined period. U.S. officials appear to want at least 10 years, and turn over its existing stockpile of approximately 440 kilograms of highly enriched uranium. Iran has reportedly agreed to suspend uranium enrichment, but for a shorter window than the U.S. wants, and it has flatly refused to dismantle its nuclear facilities. Iranian state media framed Tehran's response to the latest U.S. proposal as a rejection of what it characterized as a demand for surrender. Trump called Iran's latest counteroffer totally unacceptable and stupid. Iran said it would never bow. And then, almost simultaneously, a one-page, 14-point memorandum of understanding began circulating in back-channel negotiations, a document that, if agreed to, could end the formal war within 30 days and begin the process of reopening the strait. That memo is being negotiated between Trump's envoys, Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, and several Iranian officials, directly and through mediators. In its current form, it would declare an end to the war and start a 30-day period of negotiations on a detailed agreement to open the strait, limit Iran's nuclear program, and lift U.S. sanctions. So, the public statements are at war with each other. The back-channel negotiations are still alive. Which one reflects reality? Here's the detail almost everyone missed. A Chinese supertanker was spotted moving through the Strait of Hormuz on the same morning Trump boarded Air Force One for Beijing. One ship, one corridor, one summit. Nothing about that timing is coincidental. The Strait of Hormuz is not just a shipping lane. It is the artery through which the modern global economy breathes. At normal capacity, roughly a fifth of the world's oil supply passes through that narrow strip of water between the Iranian coast and the Gulf of Oman. It doesn't matter whether your country has anything to do with the Middle East. If you drive a car, heat a home, or buy anything that was transported by ship or truck, the Strait of Hormuz affects you. The U.S. Energy Department has now raised its forecast for gas prices, warning that oil futures will likely stay above $100 a barrel in the coming weeks. Retail gas prices in the United States are now expected to average $3.88 a gallon this year and $3.62 next year. Those are national averages. In many parts of the country, the numbers are already higher. One of the world's largest onshore gas processing facilities, located in the United Arab Emirates, will not return to full operational capacity until 2027, after Iranian strikes hampered production. Read that again. Until 2027. That facility processes enormous volumes of natural gas for global markets. Its disruption is not a temporary blip. It is a multi-year structural wound to global energy supply. Now enter China. China is Iran's main oil importer, relying on a network of shadow fleet vessels to ferry crude between Iranian ports and so-called teapot refineries, smaller independent processors that avoid the scrutiny of major state-owned facilities. This is the hidden architecture of Iranian oil survival. Even under American sanctions, even under a naval blockade, Iran has continued moving oil to China through this shadow network. That oil keeps Iran financially alive, and it keeps China's refining sector supplied. Trump knows this, which is why he's on a plane to Beijing. Trump said he'll have a long talk on Iran with Xi Jinping, but downplayed the need for Beijing's direct help. That downplaying is either diplomatic strategy or denial, because without China squeezing Iran economically, Tehran has far less incentive to make real concessions. Talks between the U.S. and Iran are unlikely to make significant progress before the Trump-Xi summit, according to a regional source close to the negotiations. Movement on the talks will depend on the results of President Trump's visit to Beijing, the source said. So the trajectory of this war and whether peace is possible may hinge on a meeting between two leaders whose countries are engaged in their own strategic competition for global power. Do you think this situation moves toward a deal after the Beijing summit? Or do things get worse before they get better? Let me know what you think in the comments. I read every one. There are different camps within the Trump administration recommending alternating approaches. Some, including officials at the Pentagon, have argued for a more aggressive posture, including targeted strikes designed to further weaken Iran's position at the negotiating table. Others are still pushing to give diplomacy more runway. Two factions, two very different futures. And a president who has said, publicly and on the record, that he doesn't think about Americans' financial situation when negotiating. The internal contradiction inside the White House is almost as large as the one between Washington and Tehran. Here's what the headline numbers are covering up. A former State Department negotiator who helped construct the 2015 Iran nuclear deal told CNN it is now much tougher to get a deal than it was during those original negotiations. He added something that cuts through all the official optimism. A lot of what we are hearing in public is not tracking with underlying reality from either side. Not tracking with reality from either side. That means the public statements from Washington and Tehran, the rejection rhetoric, the totally unacceptable posts, the never bow declarations, may all be performance, negotiating theater for domestic audiences, while the real conversations happen in back rooms in Islamabad or Geneva. Or it means the gap is real, the talks are genuinely failing, and what's being described as a ceasefire is quietly preparing to unravel. At this point, no one outside a very small number of rooms actually knows which it is. Forget the geopolitics for a moment. Think about a family in Pasadena, California, pulling into a Chevron station on a Monday morning. The price board reads well above $4. They fill up. They don't say anything. They drive away. That cost is there every week, every fill-up, invisible in the headline coverage, but absolutely present in every household budget across the country. That's what a war in the Persian Gulf looks like at ground level in America. The $29 billion military price tag gets the press conference. The daily cost of fuel gets absorbed silently by tens of millions of people who have no vote on whether this war continues, what terms are acceptable, or when the blockade lifts. And the president told reporters, "I don't think about Americans' financial situation when negotiating with Iran. What he said next matters. I think about one thing. We cannot let Iran have a nuclear weapon. That's all." That's a statement of principle. It's also a statement that explicitly places the economic pain of ordinary American families somewhere below the priority line in these negotiations. Whether you agree with that calculus or not, it is the calculus, and it is now official, on the record. Across the Persian Gulf, the picture is different, but equally heavy. A large oil spill continues to spread in the waters off Iran's Karg Island. Satellite imagery shows the spill flowing southward and fragmenting as it moves. Karg Island handles the vast majority of Iran's oil exports. An oil spill of this scale in the Persian Gulf doesn't stay contained. It moves with current. It hits coastlines. It affects fisheries, water desalination infrastructure, and marine ecosystems that coastal communities depend on for survival. The environmental cost of this war is just beginning to be measured. The human cost along those coastlines, fishing communities, port workers, families who live close to the water, is harder to photograph, but no less real. Inside Iran itself, the economic pressure has been building for years and is now accelerated sharply. The U.S. naval blockade cuts off Iran's ports. The shadow fleet that moves Iranian oil to China operates under constant risk of interception or worse. The Iranian economy was already under severe strain from years of sanctions. Now it faces an active naval blockade and the physical consequences of a military campaign. Iranian leadership appears divided on how to respond. That internal division is not just a diplomatic complication for Washington. It is a source of genuine instability for ordinary Iranians. When a government is fractured and under military pressure simultaneously, the consequences tend to fall hardest on the people least responsible for the decisions that led there. Then there's the Strait of Hormuz itself, and what its closure means for countries that are not America, not Iran, and not China. Countries in South Asia, East Africa, and parts of Europe depend on oil and liquefied natural gas that transits through that corridor. When that flow slows to a trickle, it doesn't just raise prices. It creates shortages, drives inflation, and in some cases affects the availability of fuel for electricity generation and food production. The ripple effects of a closed strait are not abstract. They show up in power cuts, in transport costs, in the price of bread. A Qatari liquefied natural gas tanker crossed the Strait of Hormuz on Sunday for the first time since the war began, a passage reportedly approved by Iran to build confidence with Qatar and Pakistan. One tanker, one crossing, treated as a diplomatic signal because it was so rare. That's where we are. One tanker crossing is news. And then, on Wednesday morning, ship tracking data caught something else. A Chinese-flagged oil supertanker, the Yuan Huahu, was seen moving east through the Strait of Hormuz. It was last tracked at around 8:45 a.m. local time. After that, its automatic identification system, the AIS transponder that all ships are required to broadcast, went dark. It's unclear if it turned the system off deliberately or if something else happened. A supertanker going dark in the most contested shipping lane on Earth. On the morning the U.S. president flew to Beijing, you can draw your own conclusions about the timing. If the one-page memorandum of understanding being negotiated behind closed doors collapses, U.S. forces would be able to restore the full naval blockade or resume active military operations. That's written into the framework itself as an option. Some Pentagon officials are already arguing for a harder line, targeted strikes designed to degrade Iran's position further before any deal is signed. Meanwhile, a Harvard expert puts the potential total cost of this war at $1 trillion, and the meter is running. If the Beijing summit fails to move China, and if the back-channel negotiations produce nothing, the U.S. faces a choice: escalate in ways that carry enormous risk, or accept a deal that critics will call inadequate. There is no clean exit. There is no option without a price. Pull back. Look at this from altitude. What's actually happening here is not just a U.S.-Iran conflict. It is a collision of multiple power structures that have been building for decades, now hitting a crisis point simultaneously. The United States wants Iran's nuclear program ended, permanently, verifiably, and without conditions that allow Tehran to reverse course if the political winds shift. That's the stated goal. The military operation was designed to create enough pressure to make Iran negotiate from a position of weakness. But Iran has been living under sanctions and pressure for over 40 years. Its government, whatever its internal divisions, has developed a tolerance for isolation that is genuinely unusual in the modern world. The nuclear program is not just a strategic asset to Tehran, it is by now a symbol of sovereign defiance. Demanding Iran surrender it completely and quickly may be asking for something that no Iranian government, regardless of faction, can politically afford to give. The one-page memorandum being discussed would involve Iran committing to a moratorium on nuclear enrichment, the U.S. agreeing to lift sanctions and release billions in frozen Iranian funds, and both sides gradually lifting restrictions on Strait of Hormuz transit. The duration of the enrichment moratorium is being actively negotiated. Sources say it would be at least 12 years, with 15 years seen as a possible landing point. That's not the 20-year moratorium Washington initially demanded. And Iran has reportedly rejected dismantling its nuclear facilities entirely. So even the most optimistic version of a deal involves significant compromise from the U.S. side. After a war that has now cost $29 billion, disrupted global energy markets, and created an environmental crisis in the Persian Gulf. Whether that trade-off is worth it depends entirely on your definition of success. Then there's China. Trump is expected to encourage Xi Jinping to push Iran to reopen the strait and agree to a suitable peace deal. That's a large ask. China's relationship with Iran is not an accident or an oversight. It is a deliberate strategic architecture. Iran provides China with deeply discounted oil outside the dollar-denominated international oil market. China provides Iran with economic lifelines and diplomatic cover. Each needs the other. Asking Xi to pressure Iran is asking him to damage a relationship Beijing has spent decades constructing and to accept higher oil costs for Chinese industry during a period when China's own economy is navigating serious headwinds. That is not an ask that gets answered easily, regardless of what's said in whatever joint statement emerges from Beijing. At the same time, China does not want this war to escalate. A full-scale return to hot conflict in the Persian Gulf is catastrophic for Chinese energy security. The shadow fleet moving Iranian oil to China operates in a world where the strait is tense but passable. If the blockade tightens or active strikes resume, even that route becomes impossible. So Xi has leverage over both sides, and both sides know it. What intelligence agencies are watching right now? The movements of Iranian nuclear material, the posture of Iranian forces near the strait, any indication that either side is preparing for resumed military action, and whether the back-channel negotiations produce a signed document or another collapse. What viewers should watch next: whether Trump emerges from Beijing with any concrete commitment from Xi, not a vague expression of shared interest in stability, but something specific and measurable, and whether the ceasefire holds through the week as Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi meets with the foreign ministers of Saudi Arabia and Egypt on the sidelines of a major multilateral gathering. Araghchi's presence at the BRICS foreign ministers meeting is considered significant, as Saudi and Egyptian diplomats will also be in attendance. In a conflict where almost all the meaningful movement happens in rooms without cameras, the attendance list at a foreign minister's dinner matters more than a presidential press conference. This war began on February 28th. It has cost $29 billion in 75 days. The ceasefire is on, in the president's own words, massive life support. A Chinese supertanker went dark in the Strait of Hormuz this morning, and the man who authorized the war told reporters he doesn't think about what it's costing the people he was elected to serve. None of this is resolved. All of it is accelerating. The next 72 hours could be the most consequential of this entire conflict. Trump's meeting with Xi, Araghchi's conversations at BRICS, the back-channel memo, the drone shadow war that continues underneath a ceasefire that barely exists. What do you think happens? Does Trump come out of Beijing with something real, or does this war take another turn? Drop your read on this in the comments. This community gets things right more often than most newsrooms do. And subscribe, because this story does not slow down, and you need to be here when the next development breaks.